Pregnant wife gives birth alone. Billionaire husband is now filled with regret. There's a thin line between love and loss, trust and betrayal. Some cross it by accident, others by choice. Meet Benjamin Harrington, a self-made millionaire with a mansion on the most coveted street in Beverly Hills, a fleet of luxury cars, and an astonishing net worth that sparkles like the night sky. He was certain he had it all until a single phone call changed his world forever. While Benjamin preoccupied himself with lavish dinners and high-stakes deals, his pregnant wife, Ava, reached her breaking point. With her contractions suddenly starting and no one by her side, their story unraveled in ways no one could have foreseen. Benjamin Harrington was born into modest means in rural Ohio. He grew up surrounded by fields of corn and soy, his family barely scraping by. Their small farmhouse was drafty in winter and sweltering in summer, the ancient windows rattling each time a truck drove by. From a young age, Benjamin had a strong will to create a better life for himself. He spent afternoons reading the biographies of entrepreneurs, devouring tales of those who rose from humble origins to unimaginable success. Names like Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, and Bill Gates peppered the pages of his notebooks, scrawled in his determined handwriting. His father, Theodore Harrington, worked at a local factory, operating heavy machinery that rumbled and hissed like a restless beast, while his mother, Caroline Harrington, did her best to put meals on the table with careful budgeting. They loved Benjamin, but they were wary of his big city ambitions. "You'll lose your soul out there," Theodore would warn him, wiping his broad hands on his grease-stained overalls. Benjamin would only smile, eyes shining with the conviction of a dreamer. By the time Benjamin turned 18, he had already won a partial scholarship to study business at a prestigious college in New York. Using every penny he and his parents could scrape together, plus student loans, he embarked on a relentless journey of self-discovery and ambition. He excelled in his finance classes and found part-time work at an investment firm, quickly catching the eye of mentors who recognized his fierce intelligence. The boy from Ohio, it seemed, was poised for bigger things. After graduation, Benjamin was recruited by a hedge fund on Wall Street. Here, he quickly amassed a reputation for fearlessness. The roaring markets, late-night coffee binges, and high-stakes trades fueled him like adrenaline in the veins. Soon, he was making impressive gains, and his personal portfolio ballooned beyond his wildest dreams. He decided to step away from corporate life to start his own private equity firm, Harrington Holdings. At only 28, he was already featured in Forbes, rubbing shoulders, at least in print, with financial giants. As his wealth grew, so did his circle of acquaintances. He found himself invited to gala dinners with celebrities, philanthropic events featuring the likes of Warren Buffett, and glamorous art auctions where millions changed hands in the blink of an eye. During one such extravagant function in Los Angeles, Benjamin met Ava Stanford. Ava was different from the typical socialites that graced these events. She had grown up in the Midwest, just like him, raised by a single mother, Elizabeth Stanford, who worked tirelessly as a nurse. Ava had moved to Los Angeles in her early 20s, hoping to establish her own interior design business. Unlike many in that circle, she was unpretentious, charmingly candid about her struggles, and unabashedly proud of her mother's sacrifices. She found the city superficial, but it was where opportunity resided. Her dream to design luxurious interiors for high-end hotels and homes. When Ava first locked eyes with Benjamin at a glitzy Hollywood fundraiser, it was as though a silent bridge formed between them. Both recognized a piece of themselves in the other, Midwestern resilience and a hunger for a better life. Their courtship was swift, passionate and surprisingly grounded. They talked more about their shared values and challenging upbringings than about the swirling extravagance around them. Within a year, Benjamin proposed. The ring was a dazzling solitaire diamond, rumored to cost more than most people's annual salaries. Ava accepted with trembling hands and eyes filled with tears. It felt like the best decision she'd ever made after all. She loved him deeply, and he, by all accounts, adored her. For the first few years of their marriage, they were the picture of a golden couple. They lived in a contemporary mansion in Beverly Hills that Ava had decorated with subtle elegance. Instead of gaudy displays of wealth, Ava used warm, neutral tones and thoughtfully placed statement pieces. Celebrity guests raved about her interior design talents, and soon Ava's modest business began drawing an exclusive clientele. Meanwhile, Harrington Holdings soared to new heights. As time passed, though, the glimmer of their honeymoon period faded beneath the weight of real-life pressures. Benjamin's obsession with expanding his empire grew ever more consuming. The once tender, attentive man who'd hold Ava's hand and listen to her every word began spending more and more nights at the office, or worse, in foreign countries, striking deals that would further swell his fortune. Ava's design business also demanded her time, but she tried to keep a balanced schedule, reserving weekends for relaxation and connecting with her husband. Benjamin, however, gave no such courtesy. He worked relentlessly, chasing bigger deals, forging new alliances, and hosting lavish events for potential investors. The emotional distance between them widened. On the rare evenings when Benjamin came home for dinner, he was often distracted. A flurry of phone calls, text messages, and urgent emails pulled him away from every conversation. Ava felt she was turning into a mere adornment in his life, an accessory he trotted out for public appearances, but neglected behind closed doors. In their 4th year of marriage, Ava discovered she was pregnant. Her heart soared. She dreamed of the warmth a child would bring to their relationship. This, she believed, would be the turning point. She pictured Benjamin, once so caring and supportive, reconnecting with his gentler nature to become a devoted father. When she broke the news, Benjamin's initial reaction was one of stunned silence. Then, slowly, a grin formed across his face, and he enveloped her in a hug that felt strong and reassuring. Yet over the next few months, that brief glimpse of excitement waned. Benjamin's business deals loomed larger than ever, especially after he was introduced to the reclusive billionaire investor, Dmitry Novikov, rumored to manage $1 trillion fortune through a secretive network of holding companies. Securing an investment from Novikov would catapult Harrington Holdings into the stratosphere of global finance. To Benjamin, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and he poured every ounce of energy into sealing that deal. He flew to Geneva, Dubai, Hong Kong, and Berlin, chasing Novikov's elusive presence. While Benjamin circled the globe, Ava felt her belly grow, and with it, her loneliness. She tried to schedule routine checkups. At times she thought Benjamin would be available, but he was always dashing off to some urgent meeting or once-in-a-century opportunity. Ava's pleas became white noise in the background of Benjamin's unstoppable ambition. The final straw landed when Ava was in her 8th month of pregnancy. She organized a special weekend getaway in Santa Barbara, a brief respite by the ocean to reconnect before the baby arrived. She yearned for them to watch the sunset over the Pacific, talk about baby names, and simply be husband and wife again. Benjamin promised to be there, but last-minute negotiations with Novikov's team prompted him to cancel. Ava, her dreams crushed, spent that weekend alone, walking the shoreline in tears. Whispers among their friends indeed. They had many in Los Angeles' tight-knit social scene began to swirl. "Where's Benjamin?" became the ubiquitous question at events. Ava found herself making excuses. He's traveling for work, or he's closing a critical deal, or simply he's busy. But the more Ava uttered these lines, the hollower they felt, almost as though she were apologizing for her own husband's absence. Throughout her pregnancy, the only true emotional support Ava received came from her mother, Elizabeth, who flew in from Kansas City to be by her daughter's side. Elizabeth would cook comfort food, share stories of her own experience raising Ava, and remind her that she wasn't alone. A mother's love is the strongest force on earth, Elizabeth would say, gently rubbing Ava's belly. Even if Benjamin's absent for now, this baby will remind him what truly matters. Ava clung to that hope. She pictured Benjamin in the delivery room, tears in his eyes as he held their newborn for the first time. She was certain the birth would rekindle the deep bond they once shared. She waited for him to come to his senses. Little did she know, fate was about to twist the knife deeper. One overcast afternoon, in the final weeks of Ava's pregnancy, she found herself again alone in the sprawling mansion. Elizabeth had returned home briefly to deal with a medical emergency at her nursing job, planning to come back closer to the due date. The house was eerily silent, broken only by the faint hum of air conditioning and the occasional rustle of palm fronds outside. Ava was flipping through a baby name book, something she'd asked Benjamin to do with her. She'd bookmarked a few favorites, Oliver for a boy, Noel for a girl. But Benjamin had never found the time to discuss it. On this particular day, he was in Hong Kong meeting with Novikov's legal representatives. A time zone away, he was unreachable for hours on end. Something felt different in Ava's body. Tightness, pressure. She dismissed it as a Braxton Hicks contraction, a false alarm common in late pregnancy. But the sensation intensified, and she realized she hadn't felt the baby move in a while. Anxiety gnawed at her. She called Benjamin's phone, no answer. She left him a message, voice trembling. "Benjamin, please call me when you can. I'm worried about the baby. I need you." After an hour with no response, she called her OB-GYN doctor, Emily Rogers, who advised her to head to the hospital for a checkup. Ava took a taxi, refusing to risk driving herself in her nervous state. At the hospital, the monitors showed mild contractions, but the baby's heartbeat was still strong. Dr. Rogers suggested an overnight stay for observation. Ava agreed, hoping she could rest easy and maybe get in touch with Benjamin or Elizabeth. That night in the hospital felt interminable. The dull green glow of the fluorescent lights and the smell of antiseptic reminded Ava of the many nights her mother had spent working double shifts. She stared at her phone, sending text after text to Benjamin. No reply. She left voicemail after voicemail, her voice breaking. With each minute she grew more frightened and more resentful. How could he ignore her at a time like this? By morning, the doctors concluded she wasn't in active labor and allowed her to go home, albeit with a warning to call immediately if the contractions resumed in force. Ava left the hospital feeling emotionally spent. She tried to keep her composure, telling herself it wasn't unusual for husbands to miss calls while traveling. Yet a bitter seed had been planted, and it would soon take root. When Benjamin finally returned her call, nearly 24 hours later, she was back in the mansion, alone and shaken. She answered the phone in tears, but Benjamin's demeanor was oddly brisk. "I'm sorry I missed your calls, Ava," he said. His voice was full of forced concern. "But I was in a critical meeting. I literally couldn't step away." "You couldn't step away to answer your pregnant wife's calls?" Ava demanded, her voice quivering between sadness and fury. "I was in the hospital, Benjamin. I was alone. I needed you." Benjamin paused, and for a moment Ava believed she could hear real remorse in his silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was earnest, though laced with the tension of a man juggling $1 million negotiation. "I'm sorry, Ava. Truly. That deal was at a tipping point. I needed Novikov's signature to finalize everything. I promise I'll make it up to you. I'll be home next week and we'll go to every appointment together from then on. She hung up, tears burning her cheeks. A part of her wanted to believe him, but another part, the one that had heard 1,000 empty promises, remained skeptical. Yet in the week that followed, there was still no sign of Benjamin. Each day he claimed he was almost done. The contract was just waiting for one last signature. Meanwhile, Ava's nights were riddled with false contractions and an uneasy sense that something was profoundly wrong. When Ava reached 39 weeks, Dr. Rogers warned her that the baby might come at any moment, especially given the recurring contractions. Ava relayed this to Benjamin with urgent texts and voicemails, but he still insisted that he needed just a few more days. She started to lose count of how many times he'd said that. Then came the day her world shattered. It started like any other. Ava awoke to an empty bed, her phone silent and a dull ache low in her belly. She rose carefully, heading to the kitchen for breakfast. While struggling to pour herself a glass of orange juice, she doubled over in pain. This time, it wasn't a dull ache or passing pressure. This was raw, slicing pain. She dropped the glass, orange juice spilling across the marble floor. Her water broke. She stared, heart pounding in her chest, at the fluid trickling down her legs. Fear slammed into her like a tidal wave. She grabbed her phone, dialing Benjamin over and over. No answer. She tried Elizabeth. Straight to voicemail. Elizabeth was flying in that night and must have been on the plane. She called Dr. Rogers, who told her to come to the hospital immediately. She realized with dawning horror that she was completely alone. No one was around to drive her, to calm her, to support her. Her staff housekeepers, the gardener, had already left, and in her panic, she couldn't remember any of their numbers. Shaking, she pressed the button for a taxi. The ride to the hospital was a blur of agony. Contractions ripped through her, and her breathing came in ragged gasps. The taxi driver, an older man named Shied, tried to reassure her, but she couldn't focus on his words. At the hospital, nurses rushed her into a delivery room. Dr. Rogers arrived within minutes. Ava moaned in pain, calling out for Benjamin in delirious desperation. She looked around, half-crazed with contractions, seeing the stark white walls and bright surgical lights. Tears streamed down her face. She'd pictured this moment so many times, Benjamin at her side, holding her hand, whispering words of comfort. Instead, she was surrounded by strangers, frightened and alone. Time lost its meaning in the whirl of pain and medical procedures. Nurses encouraged her to push. Dr. Rogers gave calm instructions, and Ava screamed through each contraction. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a tiny, piercing cry filled the room. Ava's entire body shook as the nurse placed a baby, a girl, onto her chest. Relief and heartbreak collided in her as she gazed at her daughter's scrunched red face, the soft, downy hair on her head, and felt the baby's heartbeat against her own. Ava sobbed, overwhelmed by the miracle of new life and the catastrophic absence of her husband. She whispered a name she'd decided alone, Noel. The nurses smiled, congratulating her. Yet the look in her eyes, lost, lonely, spoke volumes. She had given birth without the man she thought would be her forever partner. Even as Ava lay there, baby in arms, she kept searching the door, hoping, praying that any second Benjamin would burst into the room, breathless and contrite, showering her with apologies and love. But minute by minute, that hope withered. When Benjamin Harrington finally stepped off his private jet in Los Angeles, it was nearly 24 hours after Ava had given birth. He was exultant about the contract in his briefcase, a signed agreement with Dmitry Novikov that would funnel billions into Harrington Holdings. This was the apex of his career. His phone had been off most of the flight, as he'd been in celebratory mode with a few close associates. The moment he turned it on, a barrage of missed calls and messages lit up the screen. His heart froze when he heard Ava's frantic voicemails, each one more desperate than the last. An icy grip of fear clutched his chest as he heard her scream in pain, calling his name. He fumbled through the texts from Dr. Rogers, from Elizabeth, all echoing the same urgent refrain, "The baby is coming." "Where are you?" Panic seeped into his veins. He raced to the hospital, telling his driver to ignore every traffic light. Guilt gnawed at him, mixing with dread, as he wondered if he'd already missed everything. When he reached the maternity ward, he found a night nurse who recognized Ava's name. She gave him a cold, disapproving glance. "Your wife was discharged a few hours ago. She and your baby girl are home now," she said curtly. Benjamin felt both relief that they were okay and shame for not being there when they needed him most. He hurried back into the car and headed straight for the mansion. The press of triumph he'd felt upon landing had evaporated, replaced by a knot of anxiety. He arrived to a deafening quiet. Usually, staff would greet him, but he'd given them the day off in his arrogance, thinking he'd be home late. The mansion's elegant corridors felt cold and cavernous. As he made his way to the master bedroom, a faint light glowed from the partially open door. He entered to find Ava propped up in bed, cradling a tiny bundle. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Elizabeth stood at the bedside, arms crossed, glaring at Benjamin as though he were a trespasser. For a moment, he stood rooted to the spot, overwhelmed by the sight of his wife and newborn daughter. "Ava," he whispered, voice trembling. Ava's eyes lifted, dull with weariness. Tears gathered at the corners, but her expression was not one of joy or relief. It was raw heartbreak. She looked at him as though she were seeing a stranger. "You missed it," she said hoarsely, her voice cracking with unspoken pain. "She's here, Noelle Harrington." She lightly patted the baby's back, and the child made a soft cooing sound. Benjamin approached the bed with caution, as if stepping onto a minefield. He tried to reach out and touch Noelle's tiny hand. Ava didn't stop him, but she offered no warmth either. The baby's skin was incredibly soft, and her fingers wrapped instinctively around one of his. In that breathtaking moment, Benjamin felt a surge of paternal love, unlike anything he'd known. But it was accompanied by a tidal wave of regret that threatened to drown him. "I'm so sorry," he choked out, looking from the baby's face to Ava's. "I was trapped in negotiations, and Elizabeth's voice cut through his excuses, sharp and unyielding. "Stop. Ava screamed your name in that hospital. She begged for you to be there. Where were you? Closing another deal? Adding zeros to your bank account while she gave birth alone?" Benjamin's cheeks burned with shame. "I should have been here," he conceded, voice trembling. "I know I messed up." Ava's exhaustion flared into anger. "It's always about your business. Everything else, our child, feels secondary. I've made excuses for you for years, hoping you'd change. But you never did, Benjamin." Her voice rose, each word a dagger of betrayal. He sank onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. He tried to think of a defense, but all that came to mind were hollow justifications. The fact was inescapable. He'd missed the birth of his own child, the most intimate and precious moment he and Ava could have shared. That night, Benjamin stayed awake in a chair by the bedroom window, watching Ava and the baby from a distance. He felt like an outsider, a guilty spectator to the life he had destroyed. Ava hardly looked at him. Elizabeth provided all the support and care Ava needed, occasionally casting furious glances his way, as if to remind him of his colossal failure. In the morning, Ava allowed him to hold Noelle for a few minutes, but the moment felt forced, overshadowed by the tension in the room. Over the next few days, nurses and postpartum checkups brought some relief. But each time the conversation turned to the baby's delivery or Ava's health, Benjamin was reminded of his absence. The gnawing guilt consumed him. To make matters worse, pictures and announcements began to circulate among their social circle, many of whom were stunned by the rumor that Ava had delivered with no one by her side. Gossip swirled that Benjamin Harrington, the unstoppable tycoon, was too busy to show up at the birth of his daughter. Even old high school friends from Ohio reached out, perplexed and disapproving. One afternoon, as Elizabeth was about to leave for the airport, her job wouldn't allow for an extended stay. She cornered Benjamin in the living room. The polished marble floors and chandelier overhead did nothing to soften her glare. "I'm going back to Kansas City," she said, "but if you have any shred of decency left, you'll put your wife and daughter above everything else." "Money can't buy back what you missed, Benjamin. But maybe you can try to salvage what's left." He swallowed hard. "I will, Elizabeth. I promise." She nodded tersely, then turned and left. The echo of her footsteps lingered in the grand foyer, underscoring the emptiness that had crept into this once envied home. Benjamin knew he had to prove himself. Words no longer sufficed. Yet he also knew that pulling away from his business, his life's work, would be painful. Harrington Holdings was on the brink of a seismic expansion, courtesy of Novikov's investment. Even so, every time he locked eyes with Ava and saw her distant gaze, he felt a pang in his chest, as if a piece of his soul had been carved out and discarded. The days following Noelle's birth blurred into a mess of heartbreak, restless nights, and fits of awkward silence that settled over the Harrington household like a thick fog. Benjamin often felt like a trespasser in his own home. He'd see Ava pacing the nursery at 2 a.m, softly humming lullabies in a trembling voice that belied her exhaustion. During these moments, he longed to reach out, to hold her, or at least offer to rock the baby so she could rest. But a wall of unspoken resentment had formed, a barrier he could neither see nor touch, yet one that made every simple interaction fraught with tension. While still dealing with postpartum aches and emotional exhaustion, Ava poured all her remaining energy into caring for Noelle. The baby had become her sanctuary. Hour after hour, she nursed Noelle, changed her diapers, and drifted into brief naps with the infant dozing on her chest. In those fleeting moments, when Noelle's soft breathing lulled her mother to sleep, Ava found what little peace she could. Yet the second she awoke to an empty spot on the bed beside her, she felt the echo of Benjamin's absence, one that had started long before Noelle's arrival. Benjamin, on his part, made an honest effort to involve himself in the newborn routine. He tried his best with diapers, fumbling with tapes and wipes while Noelle wailed. He paced the corridors late at night, singing half-remembered lullabies from his Ohio childhood. He even attempted a bottle feeding here and there, carefully supporting Noelle's head the way Dr. Rogers had shown them. But no matter how genuinely he tried, it was never enough to erase the fact he had missed Ava's labor and the birth of his own child. Adding to the strain, Benjamin's phone seemed forever glued to his hand. Even when he set it to silent, its vibrations on the marble countertops reverberated through the house. Urgent texts, flashing notifications, and emails from far-flung time zones invaded every waking hour. Their shrill presence was a constant reminder that Benjamin existed in two worlds, one that required his unwavering attention to safeguard his millions, and another where a wife and a newborn daughter desperately needed him to be present, body and soul. Ava began to dread those telltale vibrations. Each time Benjamin's eyes darted toward his phone, her chest constricted with a familiar ache. One night, just as she managed to calm a crying Noelle, the phone buzzed. Benjamin instinctively reached for it, nearly jostling the baby from his arm. Ava's voice snapped. "Could you please focus on her for 10 minutes? She needs you more than Novikov does right now." Her tone was harsher than she intended, but she did not apologize. She was exhausted from the constant need to fend for herself, from doing midnight feedings alone, and from feeling like she was a distant second in Benjamin's ever-growing empire. Benjamin ended the call he'd just answered, his face flooded with guilt. "I'm sorry," he managed, setting the phone aside. "It was urgent." "Everything is urgent to you," Ava retorted, her voice fraying at the edges. "Except us." Her words became a turning point. As soon as they hit the air, the harsh truth in them lay bare. He was trying, but trying wasn't enough. Apologies alone would never heal Ava's heartbreak or fix his neglect. He thought often of his mother-in-law Elizabeth's pointed warning before she left. "If you have any shred of decency left, you'll put your wife and daughter above everything else." Each time he remembered those words, he felt a pang in his stomach. After much deliberation, Benjamin took a step that, for him, was monumental. He started delegating major corporate responsibilities to his most trusted executives. He informed his board that he needed time for personal matters and was to be contacted directly only if it was absolutely unavoidable. For a while, it worked. He cancelled cross-country flights, postponed appearances at high-profile galas, and let the phone go silent more often. There were fleeting mornings when Ava would carefully place a swaddled Noelle into his arms, letting him feed her or gently rock her to sleep. Some evenings, she even allowed Benjamin to accompany them to pediatric checkups. In those moments, listening to the doctor explain Noelle's growth percentile or learning how to soothe her colic, Benjamin felt glimpses of a world he realized he'd almost forfeited. And, every so often, Ava's gaze softened, reminded of the caring, humble man she had married. But just when Benjamin felt a spark of hope, something would happen, a market dip that demanded his attention, a panicked text from an anxious investor, and Ava would watch him wrestle with the urge to jump back into business mode. One misstep, and the fragile trust they were rebuilding cracked. Nights became the real battlefield. The master bedroom, once a place of warmth and passionate connection, felt as cold as a museum exhibit. Ava often chose to sleep in the nursery, using Noelle's frequent crying as a reason to stay close. She would murmur that the baby needed constant feeding or seemed extra fussy that night. Deep down, Benjamin suspected she didn't want to share a bed with him, not until she could forgive him. Lying awake alone, listening to Noelle's muffled whimpers in the next room, Benjamin felt the gravity of his mistakes pressing down on him like a physical weight. The mansion itself began to lose the vibrant touches that Ava had once so lovingly infused. Fresh bouquets of lilies and gardenias in the foyer turned into wilted flowers tossed in the trash. The scented candles she used to light in the evenings gathered dust on the shelves. The staff, usually friendly and chatty, moved quietly through the halls with eyes averted, as if afraid to upset their employers more than they already were. A heavy atmosphere of uncertainty clung to every corner. Despite the tension, Benjamin clung to a slim hope that public celebration might ease their private grief. He decided to plan a small reception to introduce Noelle to their closest friends, a gentle way. He imagined to dispel rumors about his absence at the birth and to bring a spark of joy back into the house. He limited the guest list to about 20, inviting old friends from Ohio, some of Ava's design clients who had grown dear to her, and a handful of his business associates who had known him since the early days of Harrington Holdings. On the morning of the gathering, a private catering team arrived, filling the once quiet mansion with the aromas of gourmet pastries and seared salmon canapes. Pastel balloons were arranged along the staircase, and tables were covered with fine linen cloths, topped with delicate floral centerpieces. Soft instrumental music played from hidden speakers. The setting was picture-perfect, yet the tension in the air was as sharp as broken glass. Ava emerged from the nursery wearing a simple ivory dress. Her hair was loosely pinned up, but anyone who looked closely could see the weariness etched into her eyes. She held Noelle protectively, the baby swaddled in a light pink blanket. Despite outward appearances, Ava felt painfully exposed. This party was, in part, a performance aimed at smoothing over a very real rift. Still, she smiled politely as guests trickled in, congratulating her and cooing over Noelle. Benjamin was the consummate host, greeting people at the door with a warm handshake and ushering them to the buffet. Yet each time he locked eyes with Ava across the room, he sensed her guarded distance. She entertained polite small talk with the guests who gathered around her, but any genuine laughter or joy was forced, as fragile as a porcelain figurine balanced on a precarious edge. Some guests tried to mask their curiosity with bright compliments. Others were less discreet. They whispered, wide-eyed, about the rumors, the millionaire husband who missed the birth, the pregnant wife left alone to drive herself to the hospital. These murmurs reached Ava's ears throughout the evening, validating every hurt she'd endured. Still, she clutched Noelle tightly and forged on with tight smiles, nodding politely when acquaintances praised her strength and resilience. In a corner of the living room, an old friend from Benjamin's high school days, Marcus O'Neill, waited for a moment to speak to him in private. Eventually, he found Benjamin by the champagne fountain, swirling a glass nervously. Marcus approached with an uneasy smile. "Congrats on everything," Marcus began, lifting his own glass in a half-toast. "But rumor has it you weren't in the room when Ava gave birth. Is that?" Benjamin's throat clenched. He swallowed hard, then nodded. "I was away. I regret it more than you'll ever know." Marcus sighed, shaking his head. "I remember how you used to say you'd never let money run your life, that you'd be different from those cutthroat corporate suits. Don't let success ruin the best parts of yourself, man." Once you cross that line, Benjamin had no response, only shame. He sipped his champagne, avoiding eye contact. Just then, Ava passed by with Noelle, overhearing enough to glean Marcus's meaning. An anguished expression flickered across her face. She continued walking, but the damage was done. Each time someone mentioned Benjamin's absence, it was like pouring salt on an open wound. As the afternoon progressed, Olivia Martinez, Ava's longtime friend and confidant, cornered Benjamin near the buffet, laden with mini quiches and fruit tarts. Her voice was low, her gaze unwavering. "She loves you," Olivia said matter-of-factly, "but she's hurting, and she feels alone." "You do see that, right?" Benjamin's shoulders sagged. "I see it," he said, glancing toward where Ava stood by the window, absently rocking Noelle in her arms. "I just don't know how to fix what I've done." Olivia softened. "Start by being there, really there. She's not asking for miracles, just your presence. Every time you let the phone call you away, it cuts a little deeper." With that, Olivia gave him a sympathetic pat on the shoulder before guiding another guest to the dessert table. Benjamin stood rooted to the spot, feeling simultaneously exposed and despairing. Everything he'd worked so hard to acquire, this mansion, the business success, the mountain of wealth, seemed utterly meaningless if he couldn't mend the bond with Ava and be the father Noelle deserved. Gradually, guests began to trickle out with gentle hugs and well wishes. Ava, growing weary of forced smiles, slipped away to the nursery before the last car had even pulled out of the driveway. She didn't say goodbye to Benjamin, nor did she invite him to join her. She simply left him to deal with the awkward final farewells. As the last vehicle disappeared down the long gated driveway, Benjamin stood on the front steps, gazing at the Beverly Hills skyline. The luminous city lights twinkled in the distance, once a symbol of his ascent from rural Ohio to high society. Now, each glittering bulb seemed like a silent rebuke, taunting him for failing to protect the things that mattered most. He re-entered the house and found it eerily quiet. Wrapping up the last of the uneaten food, the catering staff offered polite nods before departing. Balloons still bobbed listlessly in the foyer, and pastel confetti sparkled half-heartedly on the marble floor. But the atmosphere was stifling, a grand display of wealth that no longer held any joy. He headed to the nursery, knocking gently. Ava was sitting in a rocking chair, Noelle asleep in her arms. She barely acknowledged him, her gaze fixed on the baby's tiny face. Benjamin could see the tear tracks on Ava's cheeks and felt a stabbing ache in his chest. He wanted to say something, to apologize yet again, but realized the weight of words had worn thin. That night, he walked the empty halls alone. By the time he reached the master bedroom, the reality of his life felt almost too heavy to bear. He had built an empire to ensure comfort and security, but at what cost? Cursing under his breath, he loosened his tie and sat on the edge of the meticulously made bed. He had money, influence, and the ear of powerful people across the world, but he didn't have the one thing he desperately needed: Ava's trust. She was slipping through his fingers, and he feared he might already be too late to keep his family from shattering. The mansion lay silent, save for Noelle's occasional cries echoing faintly through the corridors. Each cry was a reminder both of his failures and of the hope that still existed in that tiny new life. One way or another, Benjamin realized, something had to change. Otherwise, the cracks in these walls would soon become fissures, and he would lose Ava and Noelle forever. In the following weeks, as Noelle gradually began sleeping through a few more hours of the night, Ava decided she couldn't stay locked away in the mansion. She resumed light duties in her interior design business, albeit from home, taking on smaller projects she could manage remotely. Each client praised her eye for detail and comforting aesthetic. The work was a welcome distraction from the heartbreak at home. Meanwhile, Benjamin found himself in an internal tug-of-war. On one hand, he desperately wanted to be the husband and father his family deserved. On the other, the demands of his empire kept beckoning. Although he delegated many tasks, urgent matters still filtered up to him. He tried to handle them discreetly, but Ava noticed every slip back into old habits. Every phone call, every slip out to a business lunch reminded her of the man who had left her to deliver their baby alone. Then came news that threatened to blow apart their fragile peace. An investigative reporter from a major financial publication, Neil Harwood, had been snooping around Harrington Holdings. Rumors suggested that Dmitry Novikov's funds might be tainted by unethical sources, money linked to arms deals, and unsavory political regimes. This raised serious red flags for US regulators, and Harrington Holdings was now under scrutiny. Suddenly, the world that Benjamin had built on deals and cunning negotiations teetered on the edge of a scandal. Investors panicked, stock prices of affiliated entities dipped, and the whispers of potential criminal investigations grew louder. The headlines online were ominous. Harrington Holdings, tied to shady billionaire, is Benjamin Harrington in over his head. Reporters camped outside the mansion gates, camera lenses trained on any movement. Paparazzi zeroed in on the personal angle, the new father embroiled in corporate controversy, the wife he'd left to give birth alone. Tabloid outlets had a field day with speculation. Under this relentless glare, the already tenuous relationship between Benjamin and Ava reached a breaking point. One morning, as Benjamin frantically answered calls from his legal team, he yelled instructions into the phone in the hallway. Ava, holding a fussing Noelle, stepped out of the nursery and overheard him. "Tell them, I have no knowledge of Novikov's alleged back channels," he growled. "We are victims in this, not perpetrators." After he hung up, he noticed Ava watching him. He tried to explain, "It's just a misunderstanding. We'll sort it out." She looked at him, silent for a moment, then asked, "How deep in this are you?" "Deep enough," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "But I'll handle it. You and Noel won't be dragged into this." Ava cut him off, her voice surprisingly calm. "But we already are, Benjamin. Look out the windows. There are reporters with cameras aimed at our house. My phone rings non-stop with questions I can't answer." Noel's face is probably all over social media by now. He opened his mouth to apologize, but the words died on his lips when he saw tears welling in her eyes. She cradled their daughter closer, as if shielding Noel from the looming darkness of her father's world. Ava took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I've lost so much faith in you these past months. You weren't there when I needed you most, and now we're in the middle of a scandal that could ruin everything. I can't do this anymore, Benjamin. I need a break from all of it." His throat constricted. "Ava, don't say that. I'll fix it. We can get through this together. Please." She shook her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm going to stay with Olivia for a while. She has a guest house. I need space. I need time to think about whether this marriage has a future." Her words crashed over him like a cold wave. He'd always assumed that no matter how bad things got, Ava would be by his side. The notion of her leaving even temporarily had never seemed real until this moment. Desperate, he reached out to touch her arm. "What about Noelle?" "She's coming with me," Ava said, her tone brooking no argument. "You can see her, but I won't have her living here right now. Not with the paparazzi, not with all this uncertainty, and especially not with a father who can't decide whether his family is more important than his next deal." Benjamin's lip quivered as he tried to form a response, but there was nothing to say. He had created this crisis through ambition, through neglect, through a blind trust in shady money. And now the love of his life was slipping away. Ava turned to walk down the hall, leaving Benjamin standing there, grief-stricken. He watched her pack a few suitcases, gently nestling Noelle's clothes and blankets. With every item she placed in the bag, it felt like another piece of their relationship was being folded away. He considered stopping her, begging on his knees for forgiveness. Yet something in Ava's stance, the set of her shoulders, the resolute angle of her chin told him it was too late for pleas. The damage was done. Within an hour, Ava, holding Noelle in her arms, walked out the door. A driver from Olivia's place pulled up, loaded the luggage, and Ava slid into the back seat without glancing back. As the car pulled away, Benjamin stood on the front step, the California sun beating down on him, mocking the cold emptiness inside. Days melted into weeks. The once bustling Harrington mansion became a mausoleum of regrets. The paparazzi lost interest in loitering outside once Ava and Noelle left, turning their attention to other scandals. The only calls Benjamin received were from lawyers, board members, and occasionally from Elizabeth, whose voice always dripped with disappointment. He tried to see Noelle, but Ava set strict boundaries. No unannounced visits, no removing Noelle from the premises. She needed to be sure Benjamin was serious about changing, not just patching things up for public relations. Benjamin complied. He visited once a week, always arranged beforehand. He'd bring baby supplies, small gifts, even stuffed animals. At first, Ava would barely speak to him, letting him hold Noelle in Olivia's living room for an hour before gently ushering him out. The more he visited, the more Ava allowed longer sessions, 2 hours, then 3. Each time he read children's books, fed her a bottle, and marveled at how quickly she was growing. One day, she smiled at him, a real baby smile that melted his heart. He snapped a photo on his phone and stared at it for hours afterward, tears welling in his eyes at the thought of all he'd almost lost. Meanwhile, Harrington Holdings waded through deep legal waters. Investigations by federal agencies threatened to freeze assets, though no definitive charges had been filed. Dmitry Novikov vanished from public view, leaving Benjamin to face the consequences. The board pressed for a scapegoat, and some board members whispered about ousting Benjamin to salvage the firm's reputation. Late one night, as Benjamin walked through the empty mansion, The echoes of his footsteps on marble floors reminded him of his loneliness. He ended up in what would have been Noelle's nursery, a room Ava had lovingly designed but never truly used. Soft pastel walls, a white crib with pink bedding, stuffed bunnies on a shelf. Dust motes floated in the pale light of the overhead lamp. Benjamin sank into the rocking chair, remembering the day Ava had put it there, telling him she envisioned rocking their baby while he read them bedtime stories. He closed his eyes, tears burning behind his lids. He saw a vision of Ava smiling, 8 months pregnant, teasing him for being clueless about baby gear. He remembered how her laughter lit up the entire house. Now, that laughter was gone, replaced by an aching silence that suffocated him. "This was all for you," he murmured, as if Ava or Noelle could somehow hear him in the still air. "I wanted to build an empire so you'd never worry about anything. I didn't realize I was leaving you behind." He spent hours there, wrestling with his remorse, listening to the clock tick away the seconds of a life he'd squandered. Determined to change, Benjamin made a bold decision. He convened an emergency board meeting and announced his temporary resignation as CEO. He explained that he needed to focus on his personal life and assist the legal team full-time in sorting out the Novikov matter. A stunned silence followed before the board members finally voted to appoint an interim leader. It was a humiliating moment for a man who had been the unstoppable engine of Harrington Holdings, but for once, Benjamin welcomed the humiliation. It felt like a step toward penance. Leaving the meeting, he placed a call to Ava. To his surprise, she picked up immediately. "I resigned," he told her quietly. "Not permanently, but for a while. I need to fix my life, Ava. You and Noelle are my life." Her voice was cautious, yet he could sense a slight softening. "Did you really?" "Yes," he said. "I know it doesn't erase anything, but I'm trying." A silence stretched between them, thick with memories and regrets. Finally, Ava said, "I see. Let's talk more when you visit Noelle tomorrow." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was an opening. He hung up, breathing a trembling sigh of relief. For the first time in weeks, a spark of hope flickered within him. Walking up the path to Olivia's guest house the next day, Benjamin felt lighter than he had in months. He clutched a bouquet of Ava's favorite flowers, gardenias, and a soft, plush blanket for Noelle. When Ava opened the door, Noelle in her arms, he offered the flowers with a tentative smile. She looked at them for a moment, then took them without a word, placing them in a vase on a side table. Benjamin stepped inside. Noticing how comfortable the space was, Olivia had decorated it in bright, airy colors, a stark contrast to the cold opulence of the mansion. They settled on the sofa, with Noelle between them, napping peacefully after a feed. Ava broke the silence first, her voice subdued. "I'm sorry for the way I've been around you, but he gently touched her hand, stopping her. "You have nothing to apologize for. I deserve your anger, your pain. I was absent when you needed me most, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life." She met his eyes, her expression conflicted. "I still love you, Benjamin, but how can I trust you again? What if another deal or another crisis takes you away?" He swallowed, then spoke with a newfound sincerity that even surprised himself. "I can't promise life will always be smooth, but I can promise to choose you and Noelle over everything else. I've stepped down from my company. I'm ready to scale down, sell off assets, if I have to, because none of it matters without you two." Ava's eyes welled up. She reached out and placed a hand on his cheek. "I want to believe you." He placed his hand over hers. "Give me the chance." Just then, Noelle stirred, tiny fists rubbing her face as she woke. She looked from her mother to her father, blinking. Benjamin lifted her gently, feeling her warmth, inhaling her sweet baby scent. His heart clenched at the realization of how close he'd come to missing out on these precious moments forever. A week later, With much caution, Ava agreed to come home, but not before laying down conditions. Benjamin would attend counseling sessions with her, commit to a consistent family schedule, and keep his phone usage to set times. He readily agreed, not as a reluctant concession, but as a lifeline. The first night they returned was surreal. The mansion, once so daunting, seemed alive with the promise of renewal. Ava placed Noelle in her crib, this time in the completed nursery. Benjamin tucked her in, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. Ava stood behind him, her arms wrapped around her torso, tears in her eyes. When they both turned out the light, Noelle settled into a peaceful slumber, as if the house finally felt like a real home. Downstairs in the living room, Benjamin presented Ava with something he'd worked on with a therapist, a marriage contract that wasn't legal but was symbolic. It outlined, in Benjamin's handwriting, his vows to listen, to prioritize family, to be present, to earn back her trust. Ava read it in silence, tears slipping down her cheeks. She nodded, signing it with a shaky pen. Then, for the first time in months, they embraced in a way that felt truly intimate. There was pain in that hug, but also hope. Benjamin's redemption didn't come overnight. It was a gradual process, marked by counseling sessions, honest conversations, and learning how to be a father without letting business overshadow fatherhood. The legal scandal at Harrington Holdings eventually settled, fines were paid, new governance measures put in place, and Novikov's investments were severed. But the ordeal cost the company a chunk of its market value, and Benjamin's reputation took a beating. Yet in some ways, those losses felt like a purification. He donated a large portion of his personal fortune to medical centers and maternal health charities, determined to turn his ill-gotten gains into something that could help other women who found themselves alone in desperate times. A significant recipient of these donations was the very hospital where Ava had delivered Noelle. He approached Dr. Rogers personally, apologizing for not being there for Ava, and thanked her for her care. Months passed, and the once icy dynamic between him and Ava began to thaw. They found themselves smiling together at Noelle's milestones, her first rollover, her first tooth, her first babbling sounds that almost formed words. When Noelle took her first step, Benjamin was there to catch her, laughing and crying all at once, marveling at how life gives second chances if one is willing to seize them. Slowly but surely, Ava learned to trust him again. She didn't forget the pain, she never would, but she saw how hard Benjamin worked to ensure he would never again fail her or their child so profoundly. The mansion, under Ava's renewed touch, regained its warmth. Fresh flowers, the smell of homemade meals, the echo of children's laughter as Noelle grew more expressive each day. Late one evening, as they watched Noelle sleep, Benjamin and Ava stood side by side, hands clasped. Ava rested her head on his shoulder. "I'm still afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid that one day you'll be seduced by that high-stakes life again." He squeezed her hand gently. "I won't lie, ambition is in my blood, but so is love for you and our daughter. I've learned the hard way what really matters. I won't go back, Ava, not if it means losing this." She looked up at him, tears of relief shining in her eyes. "Then I'll stand beside you, come what may." With that promise, they continued their journey, wounded but healing, fragile but hopeful, and committed to embracing the life that almost slipped through their fingers. Sometimes, the brightest diamonds are forged from the fiercest heat. Benjamin Harrington walked a dangerous line, nearly losing the family. He loved in pursuit of a fortune he thought meant everything. But when the moments that truly matter called out to him the birth of his daughter, the heartbreak of his wife, he stood at a crossroads of regret and redemption. Through soul-bearing confessions, unwavering determination, and the gentle power of a baby's smile, he found his way back to what mattered most. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey. If Benjamin's story moved you, if Ava's resilience inspired you, and if Noelle's innocence reminded you of life's real treasures, please hit like, share, and subscribe. Share this video with those who need a reminder that it's never too late to rediscover what truly counts. And subscribe for more real-life dramas that remind us all of the power of love and second chances.